Okay, we are going to start with part one of our corridor project. We're going to build some geometry to make a corridor and learn a few techniques on how to do some different things with that. So let's get started. We're going to go ahead and put a ground or floor on our corridor. Depending on the theme that you have, this might dictate um, what you want to create as far as the floor goes. We're going to go pretty generic. I'm not actually going to key in on any one theme here. We're just going to talk general geometry, maybe look at a couple of different ways of doing things. But in order to get a corridor, there's a lot of different ways we could approach this. Lots and lots of ways we could approach this. If I was going to just make a basic sort of rectangular structure, I could take a rectangular prism like this, do something like that, lift it up to about whatever, depending on the scale, what the height is. Um, and then if I want to make it symmetrical, I would need to consider that, right? So if I was going to cut some edge loops here for the walls, if I turn symmetry object X on, it'll give me that. Now watch what happens here. When I click on this, it actually does this line that crosses over the middle. And that's, I believe, because we need to cut a center line first and then cut it. And that will actually give us a good cut there that won't have any of those artifacts. You will notice, though, that it still gives us this weird thing underneath here where it didn't cut all the way around. And so we can just connect those two. Not anything that's super serious, but notable, okay? If I were going to continue to modify this thing, I would just go ahead and take the object itself and cut some additional detail in, which I'm going to go ahead and do. I could have also just added subdivisions on this if I really was thinking ahead. So let's go ahead and do that. So if I didn't want to go through all that rigmarole, I can just go here, and then there's a couple different ways I can manage the subdivisions. I can either go over here to Attribute Editor, which is this guy right up here, and go to P-Cube, and then manage subdivisions width. And this is much easier than what we just did. So just chopping up the geometry sometimes is fun, but not necessarily the best way to go. So I'm going to go up to 12 is usually a good number. Gives me a nice midline there, as you can see. And then I can raise this up. And before I do anything else, I might want to modify it with the deform menu. There's tons of things you can do in here. A very common one is going to be bend. So we're going to go ahead and bend this object. But notice when I click on this, it's vertical. And by it, I mean this guy, which in the outliner is called the bend handle. So if I want to rotate it, I could either come over here to channel box and rotate it along the Z 90 degrees like this. Or I can just use my rotate tool, hold down J, and that will snap to increments, and now it's 90 degrees. So it's that way. It does matter how big this thing is relative to the object. So when I go back over here to Attribute Editor and click on Bend, which is associated with the shape, or I can just click the Bend modifier or handle, then I can change the curvature to go up or down. So if I want to do something like that, I can do that. Once I do that, right, if I move the object around, it actually is going to conform to that bend modifier, which is kind of interesting. Or if I move the bend modifier, it's going to change that object, which is why a lot of times you're going to want to keep these together, or you're just going to want to delete history so that that becomes permanent, a permanent change. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and raise this up this way. I can also scale the bend modifier, which means if I do that, I can actually change the extremity of that sort of curvature there. So again, if I come up here and delete history, it makes that bend modifier go away, and now this is a permanent piece of geometry, or it's permanently deformed, I should say. If I wanted to create the walls of my hallway and I wanted it to be contiguous, I could just do something like this, where I take the face, I have symmetry X on, and then hold down Shift. We've done this before, and now I've got, some walls. And I'm going to, just for posterity, I'm going to flatten those faces out by scaling along the Y, and then I'm going to move that surface down to the bottom. Now this doesn't need to be perfect. Things like this are not things that you're going to get marked off for. If they collide through or sort of clip through the floor, then it's not a big deal. We just want to make sure, you know, that it's consistent with the environment. Okay. And you know, if we wanted some doorways, we could do all kinds of different things with a doorway here. We might consider, you know, a curved doorway. So I'm going to go ahead and create a cylinder here. Kind of lift that up. And actually, we have the geometry we probably need to make this work. But I'm going to rotate it forward. So I'm going to go ahead and hold down J so that I can snap to 90 degrees. And then I'm going to go into the front view here and move this over like that. And then just sort of scale it out until it becomes roughly doorway shape. Now I'm going to go ahead and hit 4 here, actually, excuse me, so that I can go to wireframe view and kind of see what I'm doing. Now again, if it collides through the geometry in this exercise, I'm not actually all that concerned about it. In fact, in this case, it might be preferable, but so there's that. And then I'm going to take these faces and delete the lower half like that. Don't forget to get those guys too. When I go back over here, you can see we've created sort of this arch, right? But the problem with that is, I mean, that's fine, but we have this problem, which is if you look at it, it doesn't have any bottom to it. I'm going to actually take the bottom edges and I'm just going to shift extrude them down, and shift is really great for, well, this. Shift extrude them down until I get it pretty much where I want it. It doesn't need to be exact in this case. And then I'm going to shift right click and cap, or fill hole rather. So I fill the hole. That's nice. You'll notice that doesn't actually have a connector there, so I'm going to go ahead and multi-cut and just connect these two here just for posterity. And then I'm going to right click and go to object mode. And what I'm about to do is just you know, an easy way to sort of cut this thing in half and get two sides to it. I'm going to go ahead and hit Control D, and you'll notice the key commands are down here, of course. And then I'm going to go to face, and I'm going to select these faces. Now with symmetry on, that's not going to work, so I'm going to turn symmetry off, select these faces and hit delete, and then I'm going to click this, go to face, select these faces and hit delete, and now what I have are two different objects, right? And they do have holes that we'll have to deal with. One of the other things you're going to want to learn how to do is edit the pivots of objects, right? So this pivot point needs to be moved. So if I if I tap D rather, I can move the pivot point over here and tap D again, and then if I want to rotate it, for example, it's going to rotate around that point, and so on. So I'm going to tap D, but this time I'm going to make sure I'm in object mode, by the way. And I'm going to tap D, and then I'm going to hold down the V key, V is in Victor, because then it will snap to a vertex, which is right there, which is pretty great. Tap D again, and you'll see that now it will rotate on what could be a hinge kind of thing. Okay, and then if I was smart, I could duplicate this over, or you know, scale it over to the other side, and you know, there would be that. But I'm just going to go ahead and do the same thing over here. I'm going to tap D, hold down V, move this thing over to there, and we're done. And so there's that. So when I tap D again, I can rotate it from here and so on. So if I select both of these objects and just move them back, you know, this way into the wall, kind of paying attention to what I'm doing here, then they will open that way or that way. Obviously with them both selected, that's not how we want to do that, but you can rotate them, you know, some amount. If we go over to Channel Box and Layer Editor, you'll notice that all these things are like all over the place. The scale's all over the place, the rotation's all over the place. We're going to do something called freeze, which is going to zero all these things out. In chemistry, it'd be like tearing a scale. If you're going to weigh something, we want to take it back to 0. So if I freeze it, that makes all these things go to 0, which is pretty great because now this becomes a 0 point and I can rotate or scale or whatever. I'm going to do the same thing for this one. And then I'm going to rotate it on the Y 90 degrees. And that brings it out this way. I'm going to do the same thing over here, rotate it 90 degrees, but that's going to go that way. So I'm going to go negative 90 degrees. And this gives me the ability to see the doors open like that. I'm going to go to object mode here, and then I'm going to shift right click, go to edge, and I'm going to shift right click, and fill the hole again. Same thing over here. Let's go to edge, shift click, shift right click, and then fill the hole. And then, by the way, I was double clicking to get that edge loop. Now, again, we've got these issues where it's like, do we need to cut edge loops? The geometry doesn't need to be perfect like when we were sculpting the human head, but we do want it to have some integrity. So would I cut an edge loop there? No, I don't think so. But we do need them to have filled holes so that when we actually render them, they will look okay. Okay, so there's my doorways. They're now open. And my corridor is in pretty good shape. Scaling is going to matter. You're going to fly a camera through this thing. So as you're flying a camera through and you're lighting it, which we'll go over in some subsequent video content, you're going to want to have enough real estate or geometry to get there. And in order to do that, you may actually have to scale your floor out this way or whatever, and give yourself some additional runway, literally. This is another example of where adjusting the pivot might help. So if I adjust the pivot on this thing and move it over here to about there, and then tap D again, when I scale it, I can scale it away from this point, which is kind of nice because maybe I want a corridor that's about that long. Our fly through with our camera should take about 10 seconds. So in order to get that, we're going to come down here to our time slider, and we're going to adjust this up to 240. So I'm just going to go here again. 240 is down here with my slider right there. That's 240 seconds. So our camera should take about that long to get through the corridor, which is something that we'll look at in a future video. But we are at 12 minutes here, and that is the way that you can start building out some geometry for your corridor. We'll go over more geometry building, lighting, and cameras in following videos.